our customer every time.
Yeah.
Hello, good people.
Headmaster's turned up. Hi, Fred.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Shh, don't talk about him.
Yeah.
hang on.
Yes.
Oh, he can't hear us. We could still keep talking about him.
All right. Hello, Peter, as well.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hey, Peter.
Are you in control? Sorry, do you want me to log out and log in again? Is that classic? Yes. Turn it off and on again. See if that fixes it. Oh. The DJ is about to join us.
Someone say something again?
Oh, yes. I can hear you now.
Oh, I think I know what it is. I'm sorry.
Oh. Manual misalignment and bimodal switch, perchance.
Still nothing?
Nope. We can hear you.
Boom, boom.
Yeah, still hear you.
Well, this is going on. I'm going to eat, so I'm going to go off
do.
camera.
Ah, I can hear you now. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Modern technology, but now I can't see Alan, so that's a double.
No,
bonus.
well, Alan's
No, it's back.
trying to fit in his breakfast. Why
Where'd
don't
I-
you put the camera off and fit in your breakfast while we go?
Okay.
I'll just be over here.
Yeah, fair
Be
enough.
thinking in a donut.
I'm afraid I only have I have to jump off 11:25. Well, my time, so 20 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, no, timing is a bit difficult here as well today. I'm sorry. So just a little update from you guys. I had a meeting with Ismail Sargeldin yesterday, and he is the founder of the Modern Library of Alexandria. He wrote the postscript in the book. He is a wonderful guy, known him for quite a while. And him and Vint are now going to send out some invitations to more famous people, let's put it that way, to be in the book, to be interviewed. They have the option to write a piece, of course, but the invitation will be, do you want to be interviewed? And we'll have a meeting with Vint the week after next, because Vint is on holiday next week. He's taking a whole week holiday. So that's good.
You're going to
news.
turn off the internet before he goes.
That's actually quite funny. So that's on that side. On the visual meta side, so Phil, who we met last week, a few days ago, he's doing amazing stuff with parsing, but Jacob is changing what visual meta is again, in line with our discussions, just making things like heading BibTeX style rather than JSON style. So it's a bit floating. I haven't heard from ACM yet. But that's all happening whatever speed. I think we also need to work with someone else to get this into the real world and get it kicked a little bit. Last week, Friday, Adam, of course, raised lots of issues. They're all really good to have to examine, but that's basically the status. And I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, especially Mr. 20-Minute Alan.
Quick question on that's great news about inviting famous people, in the interview format, but that changes possibly in a good way the ratio of responsibility. So is it going to be email questions like you mentioned earlier, or is it going to be someone who is the point person to these people, and then what does that mean, right? Like, because it does actually put quite a bit more on your shoulders, because then you can't just say, tell me about what you think the future of text is like. They'll just be like, I don't know, better fonts.
No, exactly. I have written some questions down, and we as a community need to go through and edit them and think of them. Ismail, who really knows this category of people because of his kind of political activities, lots of Nobel Prize winners and prime ministers and whatnots. He says, keep the email ridiculously short, no more than 4 pieces, like short paragraphs, and maybe 4 to 5 questions. And they can be leading and they can be elaborated upon, but I don't think we should share the questions ahead of time unless requested. And they should be voice interviewed unless requested to be email. And also, they will all have an opportunity to veto this. It's not gotcha journalism, of course. So, we can do a podcast if they're happy with it. the transcription. They can review and edit for clarity, because obviously the whole point is get their point across. So it'll be more work. I would be doing the interviews myself. And, we have
Okay,
somebody
yeah.
professional to do the transcription. And in terms of how the book it will be, if we're aiming for about 10 of these. So it will be a good section, but it may not even be a section. It may look like a normal article, just slightly different formatted. Because remember, the book is supposed to be inspirations and thought points. So if many of the articles are very different visually as well as in content, I think that's just a good thing.
Okay.
So
Great.
the interview is closed book. No peeking at the questions ahead of time.
Well, unless they want to, because if they want to come at it, I know you're, yes, I know what you're saying, Mark, but the whole point is, I mean, the first one, we're using Michelle and Barack Obama as an example. Vint, as you heard last a few days ago, he will approach them. He has connections with them. So what would we want from them? We want platitudes. That's what political people say, and that's fine. Some kind of platitudes of support, and then try to find out support as in this is a worthwhile issue to look into. And then
if the answer is, as Alan and sort of Justin is suggesting, if the answer is better fonts, well, then we sort of know we're failing, because if that's as much as it means to a wider audience, that's actually a really so it makes it a really good ranging shot, because it's another really useful way that the community can then say, and look, these are perfectly sensible people, and this is their and this is how what we're trying to improve looks to them, and if it's so far from what we're discussing, then we are failing.
And there's a point of I'll just play the sharpening stone or something here. Kind of just like what Mark and I were talking about before. In this case, you are reaching out to a person who quite likely has never thought about the future of text beyond an ebook format, right?
Yeah.
And so you have on one side, you have an unfortunate situation where you've got you could get into an unfortunate situation, a sort of a Venn or something, or triangle, where you've got some people providing content who've thought tremendously about this, so much so that it's even hard for them to put it into words, and those are like the most unreadable essays. Then you've got nobodies, if you will, to put it bluntly, who are actually introducing some pretty wild out there content, the poet, the musician, the whatever. So that quadrant. And then you've got the popular people who are really just saying the most, it's all noise, no signal, right? It's very generic, right? So I know you don't want to put any confines on it, but the risk is that you have this noisy, uneditable.
I don't think that's a risk.
Okay.
If you don't like it, don't read it. What I mean is, and this is going to sound like a silly tangent, but Command Tab, which first started on Windows and then went over to Mac, is such a weird little thing that you probably could not think of before using a PC type system.
Yes.
It's almost uninventable.
Yes.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. So what I expect that in a few generations, the visual design of fonts, like Mark was talking about, and the way we do clickety-clack on the keyboard or with the hands or whatever, will be so different that someone today just probably wouldn't be able to read. Right?
Okay, but let me double down on the. Sorry,
Okay.
I don't mean to interrupt.
No, double down. Sure. I'll have some coffee.
So what I mean is, in part, not that Barack Obama has never thought about the future of text, right? In fact, he may have had some tremendous ideas in the past about the problems of democracy and text, et cetera, right? But are we going to have access to those thoughts in the small amount of time that he's going to be able to dedicate to answering these questions, or based on the kind of question that we offer? And this is what I mean about the interpreter's responsibility, the interviewer's responsibility. How do you remind them of where they were? Like the example you brought, that was situated context. That was brilliant, right? Like, oh yeah, I do remember the first time I go, That was never possible before. What a weird new thing we're in, right? Now I can respond to that perhaps more precisely than I can respond to what is the future of text.
I think this is a reason we need to have more of these talks for us to look along those lines. I think, yeah, I absolutely think, because I have quite a few questions and I don't think they're even good enough to share with you guys yet. If you have some, do write them down. I'll put them on the Google Doc together. But, I, in kind of defense of me doing this part, the first time I met Vint, for instance, was over breakfast. It's a long, boring story. We don't have the time, but we became friends, and he became a supporter of my work because of my introduction to him, because of the work I was doing with Doug Engelbart, and I was doing a documentary on Doug.
Mhm.
So, in terms of having 20, 30 minutes with these people, you're absolutely right. If you engage them in the right way, where they feel heard, where they feel engaged, and they have something to offer, they may very well want to continue the engagement, which could be, "Hey, let's keep going for an hour," or it could mean, "I'll write something down," or another meeting, or, "Hey, let me introduce you to so and so." Because in terms of fame is to spread the word that text is important. When it comes to the actual ideas, I agree with your that kind of window you drew, the Rumsfeld thing that actually came from the intelligence community of, we don't know what we don't know. And
Mhm.
if there's someone with absolutely no reputation but has some good ideas, the only reason you're in the book is if you have a passion for an aspect of text. That is only criteria.
Really interesting thing comes out just sort of listening to you with regards to someone, say, someone who's been a president, a national leader, or maybe someone who's a very senior medic, or someone who's basically been at at the top of their field for an interesting reason. One of the things that they may be well able to reflect on, rather than us perhaps slightly saying, well, they may have no view at all, is how did sort of text as a medium help or hinder you? Because it's an opportunity for them to say something that, or to relate something that other people may never have seen. Things like, I thought I'd be able to do this, and who knew it turned out to be really difficult because, and I won't pretend to guess what,
great.
because, and that's really interesting, because sometimes those sort of, I sort of think things like, post-deployment reports is sort of where it goes in my head in early careers. People suddenly come back and you'll sit there, crikey, I hadn't thought of that before. And what was unknown becomes something that one can fold into the overall knowledge share, and also begin to address if it's something that needs addressing. But sometimes you just need someone to speak from a completely different context. And of course, most of us never sit or do so only briefly at the top of something. Well, not necessarily top, but in a position where we ostensibly have control over or a say in.
Yeah, Mark, you got me out. Hello.
No, and this is healthy. I think there should be a session for this kind of thinking entirely. I love that direction. And Frode, by the way, yeah, absolutely. You should be the one to interview if it gets to interview. If it's more distant, like email and answer questions, that's actually kind of where I'm more concerned, right? Like, because those questions need to be really sharp if they're going to engage and get an interesting answer out of it, right? Great. But Mark, that's awesome. I mean, that even makes me think of, like, if we were to interview, well, the opposite of Obama, I guess, would be Trump or something. If you were to ask a question, would it be like, hey, what is, okay, this is, strike this from the record, but essentially, what is text to you? And then show them, flash some images, is it a hamburger? Is it a bear? I'm not saying like do that, but the idea of getting, what do these people associate text with? A way to express, a way to control, is it an accident that you just kind of like do the best you can, like being caught in a hurricane? Or is it something you create from scratch?
Yeah, I like that, the help or hindrance part. I mean, in a sense, do you see text as a facility with text as an enabling thing or a constraint?
And it's going to be both, obviously.
Well,
The
it
answer's
will
always
be.
going to be both.
But always, but always, and one hopes in interesting and unexpected ways, because
Yeah.
in a sense, this is the point of the exercise.
So
Right.
this one here, that just to go back to Mark, what you said here, I'm bolding. I really like that. And what you said there, Alan, I'm not sure if that's a question. I think you have something a bit richer in that. I think we.
I was doing a brainstorming exercise. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it was very useful because I think that's exactly what we as a community should do. It's very easy to take a political position that we don't agree with, and I do this much worse than you, so it's very easy for me to say this, and kind of patronize them. But the first ones we should patronize are ourselves. So maybe we should try to build some kind of brainstorming where we do say, what is text to us? Is it a bear? Is it a chocolate? Just complete lunacy stuff.
Yeah.
And
all right. Thanks for not patronizing me.
So now we're going to have a bunch of stable geniuses coming up with interesting.
Well, that's the thing about the thing about patronizing someone is a matter of security and control, right? If you feel secure and that you're in control, you will not be patronized.
Yeah.
Right, and vice versa. So if we ourselves can really kid about and go into different directions. Just want to show you something briefly since I have the screen here.
I should apologize in the sense that I've always worked in fields where someone's always had the hand on the edge of the rug underneath me, so I've never felt that secure in anything.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. And that aside, so here's just a quick thing to run by you guys. Apple has amazing machine learning libraries available to use now, and I'm trying to see which ones actually apply to what we're doing. Went through all kinds of stuff, and then I realized there is actually something that the user in this environment has already expressed an importance of, and that is their own glossary, their own defined terms, as we talked about many times. So here's just an example of something we're looking into. When you're reading a document, you hit whatever, Command G without selecting text, and it highlights, or rather fades, all the words in the document that are not in your own glossary. So it's not about going into a different domain. This is a domain that you're reading in your own domain. So if the
is this an example of what currently is, or are you saying this is an example of how to apply what Apple does to author?
Sorry, I'm kind of compressing too much here. That the Apple stuff gives inspiration for many other things we can do.
Gotcha.
This one is so simple, and Mark and I have been discussing it a little bit this week. It's essentially Command F for all the terms in your own glossary, right? So thank you. So the idea by having this view, because currently in Author, if you collapse the document, it'll show the highlights, and if you do names, this is what it does. That's a bit of a mistake. Shows headings plus the names. And that's okay, but it's probably more useful to have the whole document, and you can see where they are in context. You can choose to read around it or not, right?
I have to go. Apologies. Yep. I have so many thoughts just on this, and in particular, the phrase, the personal glossary. I want to revisit that because, this opens up. This is really close to my heart right here, the personal glossary and how to add to it tastefully. But unfortunately,
there's going to be a recording, so you don't miss anything.
Yes. See you later, Alan.
See you.
Sorry I was late today. It was unavoidable.
We're going to miss you, though.
Bye, Alan.
So stop sharing for a bit. Anyway, so here we are. Yeah, so the reason I kind of showed that, other than I think is very exciting, is to use the, the jury, just 1 second, absolutely.
Yeah, please.
Is, we're beginning, okay, so visual meta is not the be all and end of the whole world, I think, probably, I don't know, I wish it was, just kidding. But because we are thinking infrastructure terms, it means that we have a completely different freedom to dream, I think. If we're just dreaming on air, it doesn't, there's just literally nothing there. So to look at the what we choose are the bits of knowledge, and what do we choose are the connections are fascinating. Yeah, Jerry, I think you held your hand up first.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's really, I wouldn't say, but great people think alike. I mean, the idea that AI will save us is nuts. So anyhow, if you're interested in that, we're going to have this complexity weekend on Sunday. We're going to talk about it at length. But the point I wanted to make, and I 100% agree with you, that there is just so much you can do with simple algorithmic NLP processing. Forget about the AI. We are just so much more intelligent ourselves. And if you, as Mark said 4 years ago, this is embodied, in stone and gold, that, it's the AI is coming that way. Why can't we as humans sort of capture the semantics, the intent, what we write, as we link, so that the AI coming the other way, or whatever merging, whatever collective thing, hyper knowledge like Marc Antoine, knowledge federation engines or whatever, can actually have a real solid purchase on what we are about, especially if you get good full provenance, if you got the full history of the way these ideas evolve, you get so much more than any AI, because this is the thing. I don't want to be long, but the crucial thing, and this is what I mentioned and Vint confirmed, that I noticed it 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was, that Google every day, 15% of the word combinations that humans put together is something that the AI learning engine never seen. Okay, we are really at the edge of knowledge, and the machine has no idea why to go that way or that way. So the combinatorial explosion is hitting the machine, and yet the human mind, like as Bush was saying, has that power of selection, because we actually living being, we got a connection.
Yes.
So
Just
I 100% agree with you with your approach. Yeah.
Thank you. Just before I go over to Mark here, I just want to point out, in this context, I'm really talking about machine learning, such as natural language processing. I'm not talking about the system doing our thinking for us.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. But I'm saying that the sort of reinventing man idea is so much used to it in terms of pattern matching or patterns. Yes, but precisely the whole point of text, that is symbolic. So we are good symbol processors, better than any machine can be.
Completely think that's a very important point. Professor, Dr.
Well, it's actually quite interesting, because in a sense, to move the comment that I made that while ago that Jerry so kindly brings up again, is one could roll it forward in terms of what we've just seen. Is so when the machine comes and says, I've looked at all this, and here is the structure, instead of saying, oh dear, that's not what I thought, it's saying to the machine, no, go away and think again. It's sort of slightly turning things around so that it works for us, then us for them, which is where we seem to be at the moment.
Exactly.
And that should give us pause for thought, and is very central to the sort of things we're discussing here.
Absolutely.
Of how are we learning to understand our use of symbols in text, to encapsulate what's in here. And it does get talked about, but in very, very abstruse areas, which are probably so far from the sort of centre ground at the moment as to not be A, particularly accessible, B, particularly of use to people. But I think that's a very fertile area. And just this sense that also, if you, for instance, if you don't have a corpus of digital text, you're out of the language game. So pity the poor people where there are only 20 speakers or something. And then you sort of think what goes with that. But then if you sort of scale that up, and you don't have to scale it that far, you begin to think about sort of potential loss. So this is an area I think is quite important. And I now can't tell if Freud's concentrating very hard.
I'm just trying to drink my very bad coffee with chocolate at the bottom without ruining your entire life. Anyway,
so there was the thing I just wanted to quickly circle back onto was just to say that I felt a bit sorry for Freud, because when he first showed me the sort of glossary thing he showed me, I perhaps was a bit waspish. And I said, well, it's fine, isn't it? But with a list that you provide. But I've been thinking in the sort of days since, because I guess this was, well, maybe it was, I don't know, this week. But anyway, I was thinking on it, and I thought the nice thing about that sort of display is the contextualization, because there are some immediate things that come up. So, oh, crikey, some of my terms are turning up here. Are they turning up in a way I understand? Are they turning up in a way I don't understand? Or, you know, why does this person seem to think that what I think is this, is they think is something completely different? And those sorts of things alone. So even just that display is giving you a quite nice sort of map style thinking space. So so where the visual just becomes a kicking off for thought and reinterpretation of things, you know, without having to see the structure behind it. And that, so I'm not, well, I don't think I was particularly anti. I just see a lot more value in it than I immediately saw when we first discussed it.
I think, sorry, before Peter, because you haven't talked for a while, you know too much, right? When we look at mapping graphs and all of that from one to another, there are real issues and all of that. So that's why this is just attempting to be really, really, really simple. So I think your points were valuable. It was just a different scenario.
No, and simplicity is good, because if there's too much complexity in front of you, then most of us will just be bows under in that. So actually, the very pared back thing. So it's training oneself to look at what is there and not what, you know, we tend to talk about what is not, especially when it's something we know about. Anyway, so I'm chipping in. I'll let the other speak.
Yeah, Peter.
Okay, I wanted to show you the progress I've made on the parser.
Oh, yes, we would like to
also-
see that very much.
So we need to address what fields are going to be mandatory versus optional on some of our auxiliary data structures. At the moment, I have it set up so that the system will just automatically pull in anything with field type formatting and turn that into a JavaScript object that our code can work with on the other end. Let me start sharing screen first.
Yeah, please.
Okay, can you see me?
Yeah.
Very well.
Okay, so the first thing I'm showing you in the upper pane of the window is the actual test bed code. What we do is we start off at the very top importing some libraries. If you notice, we're importing a BibTeX parser that we'll be using down the road. So when we get the BibTeX content, we can hand it off to the battle-tested BibTeX parsing library that the JavaScript community has been working on for a number of years. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel on that element. That code will provide us with an object representing the bibliographic record that we can then interrogate and pull the different fields out of. It also has code to normalize the fields to deal with the different ways that people tend to format BibTeX bibliographies, and all that work we get for free because we're leveraging off of the NPM ecosystem. Next, we bring in some libraries here for interacting with the file system. We're also pulling in Nebulous, which we're going to be using to create our hash-based visual meta IDs that are going to be added to the document by the program itself, as opposed to the VM IDs that the user would be constructing from the paper name or the author name, whichever we decide to go with in the end, and the date. The next thing we do is have a couple utility functions, and this is just a small hack here that lets me apply the callback block in the tail call position rather than having messy code. So when we're calling the system to do our hash, we do an asynchronous call out to the Nebulous system. We feed it the buffer we got from either the string or the file content. At that point, the block will be running in the background asynchronously. So we have to wait until that promise gets resolved and turned into a real object before we can do anything with it. And that's what the upon function does. It'll just, as you see here in the example, upon hashing hello world, it will go off, get that data, and then our code block down here will just be whatever we would do as if that had been a regular synchronous JavaScript call. So that utility function is sort of waiting there for use. Next, we define our transpilation function. That takes a file directory location that's generated by a file system watcher. So that will give you the full path to whatever visual meta file it is that we want to be working with. It will then compute an alternate target directory for the results of parsing that file. And let me just show you what the directory tree looks like here. So pulling out here, our general organization of the project. Nebulous itself creates a shadow file system where you get copies of the individual files. And it also creates an IPFS hash representing that file. So this is an offline version of the interplanetary file system that doesn't go out onto the web, but it's creating it locally for you to interact with to create those hashes. Then we have node modules. This is all of the code we're pulling in from the NPM ecosystem, basically a transitive closure of everything that everything needs. We don't even need to look at that. We have our source code, which will have a folder for grammars, a folder for exemplars. Each exemplar is an example of some little piece of text that we want to match against our grammar rules to see what happens. Whenever one of the exemplars gets edited, the test bed will recognize the change to the file and run the current grammar rules against that file. So in parallel, we can be running a whole test suite of different grammar fragments. The grammars themselves are parsing expression grammars, which is the most modern format for matching unambiguous programming languages. There are versions of PEG parser generators for all of the major programming languages now, and they all take grammars that look very close to this. So if you were porting it from this particular system to another language, the grammar itself will be almost identical. In fact, all that changes really between languages are the fragments of source code in the programming language that's being targeted. So basically all that someone would have to be editing at the end are the little function blocks that are in the braces. They don't have to deal with the grammar itself. The grammar itself is basically portable across languages. Then, of course, we have the actual test bed code that I was showing you before. So you have the transpiler function. That will take a generated parser and run the generated parser against the exemplar code. When it's all done at the end of the day, we'll simply compile the grammar into a library that can be loaded from JavaScript by any other program without making use of the test bed. So this is just tooling that we're using while we're battle testing the grammar and making sure that we can put out a grammar as part of our visual meta specification that people in any language will be able to implement, and it'll be rigorous enough so that we won't wind up with edge cases messing things up. We also have a rebuild parser function. Part of the test bed's functionality is that it watches the grammar file itself, and any edits we make to the grammar file cause the parsing expression parser generator to rerun the new version of the grammar against it. Then, as soon as that's finished, it will automatically reprocess all of the exemplar files to update them to how they'd parse under the latest modification of the grammar. Next, we have two file watchers, one which is looking at our exemplar folder, and the other which is looking at the actual grammar that we care about. Those locations are defined in an external file, which is the transpiler configuration file, which is just a JSON file that contains the paths on my system. You could replace that with paths on your system if you were setting up a copy. We can also change what file extension we're reading and what file extension we're going to write the parsed results to. Jumping back again now to the test bed. As soon as the file watcher detects a change in any of these, it will either file the rebuild parser method or it will run the transpilation if it was just a file that changed. Now we can go to the grammar, and I'll walk you through that quickly. Okay, here's our grammar file. So the first thing in the grammar file are the utility functions that we need. When the parser is called, we're able to pass the libraries that we loaded in the test bed on, so they'll be available from inside of the semantic actions within the grammar. So that's JavaScript code that's being handed off from the test bed to the system, and it gets read as an options variable in the parser. So now we're able to use the Ramda library and Ramda adjunct, which are useful functional programming libraries that were written for JavaScript, to make it much less painful to work with the values that we're parsing as we're parsing them. We have two little functions here. One's a record function. This will take a field name and a value, turn it into a JavaScript object. The next one is merge record, which will take a label object that's possibly a null,
Excellent.
automatically turn that into an empty JavaScript object and combine that with all of the fields that we've parsed. So that's just the utility code up on top. We have a primary start rule, and we can test individual rules as we're going by changing what match rule we're getting. This would be done by, let's say we want to test at visual meta rule. We type at visual meta. Now the / is a prioritized choice operator. Remaining text is just a catch-all rule that will match anything that it doesn't recognize. But first, it will try to match anything to the left of any of the forward snatches. So in this case, the rule that we're testing at the moment at visual meta. So it will attempt to match all of the exemplars against the at visual meta rule. If it matches, it will produce the result in our JSON transpilation file. Otherwise, we'll just move on and match all the text and not complain with any unnecessary errors. So we can selectively test rules as we're going. Next, we have a whole bunch of utility. I collapse them here. Rules. These are all the different classes of rules. What we did was, instead of creating all the rules related to one structure in the grammar, I broke them up by role so that all of the rules will look the same and behave the same way, which makes it easier to understand what's going on in the grammar. Instead of having, start rule, content rules, end rules for each one of the productions, we have all of the terminator rules together in one place. So here we just have, first of all, an end of file marker. This says in the parsing expression grammar that there are no more characters in the file. End of line will take 0 or more spaces or tabs, followed by at least one new line or carriage return to indicate that the line's ended. Then we have some simple character classes. A glyph is anything that's not one of our pieces of white space characters. So that would let you use other code panes in Unicode that aren't immediately obvious without having to type all the mess in. You'll just recognize that it's not a white space character and accept whatever glyph you have. The white space characters, which are represented with the underscore because it's so common, you don't want to clutter up the grammar with writing white space in 1,000 places, is 0 or more. That's what the star represents. And tabs, spaces, new lines, or returns. Now we have runs. A run consists of one or more glyphs. The $sign in front of it means don't worry about the individual array of values, just merge it all together. We just want to have back the text that matches this rule. So wherever you see a $sign in the grammar, that means just give me the actual text and don't make me worry about concatenating all of the data structures that correspond to it. Next up, we have symbols. We have comma, equal, left brace, right brace. Then we have escapable symbols. This is what will let people embed bits of visual meta or messy stuff inside of rules. So we have our escaped at sign, which is going to be a double at, and escaped right brace. Right here, we are, let me get rid of the side pane. It'll be easier. The rules won't lap on the lines. Okay, escape right brace, which is going to be an at sign ahead of a right brace. And we are returning the second character of that array. And we're doing this because there's a glitch in Visual Studio Code, which causes all of the matching to go haywire if you have a right brace character inside of a return value. It gets all messed up. So this way, we're simply telling it, take the second character without letting it realize that it's a right brace, because that would throw off Microsoft's tooling. So we avoid that mess, and it is much cleaner that way. Next, we have an optional comma. A question mark following a rule says that the rule is optional. In this case, we are going to either return the comma or we'll return an empty string if there is no comma there. Groups. We define a brace group. A brace group consists of a left brace followed by another brace group, because one of the common idioms in BibTeX is that you'll wind up with a double set of braces appearing inside of the content of some fields. So this way we can cope with it cleanly. Or if you don't match a brace group, you look for an escapable character that is not a right brace. So you want a character that's potentially escapable, that's not a right brace character, and then you fill out everything else up to the next right brace, and then you return the content. Next, we have a set of record end tags. We have author end, which is going to be some optional white space followed by a right brace. Same thing for visual meta end. Next, record contents. Our records are our generic understanding of how fields in BibTeX-like records appear. This would correspond to both reference records and author records, and some of our options and our @visual meta header information, because we're following the same BibTeX parsing conventions. So you start off with a label, that's some optional white space, a run of glyphs, an optional comma, and an end of the line. And then from that, we simply return the label itself. A field consists of a field name, optional space, an equal sign, and let's say, oh, there's also be some optional space there. Let me correct that rule. A brace group, which is going to be the value of that, followed by optional space, an optional comma, just in case somebody messed up and put a space before the comma, we'll ignore that typo and correct it, and optional space afterwards. And then we return a call to our record constructor function, being passed the name of the field and the value of the field. Fields consists of one or more fields. Record content consists of an optional label followed by more fields. And then we merge all of that together into a single JavaScript object at the end of the day. Next, we have record start tags. At the moment, we have @visual meta start and author start, which are both followed by a set of fields. Next, we have our record types, @visual meta, which consists of @visual meta start, fields, @visual meta end, author, which would be an author start tag, followed by the author record content for one author, the author end, and optional white space. Now we move to environments. Environments are our constructs that are matched with an explicit opening tag and an end tag. So we have all of our environment end tags, @visual meta end, @custom end, @errata end, etc. We also have freeform content, and these are fields where we haven't specified exactly what it is, or we might not. One thing I'm doing is providing a hook for freeform data or record structured data, and those are our semi-structured contents, which I'll show you in a minute. Our structured content are going to be records where we have explicit fields required for them, or objects like a series of authors. Semi-structured contents would consist of a choice between a structured version or a freeform version. And we have our environment start tags, which are all of our @whatever starts. Then we get our freeform environments, missing visual meta errata. Let's say there's no visual meta errata at the end of the document. We are simply going to recognize that we have some white space and an end of file and return that no errata were present. So we have that information. Structured environments, here's an example, visual meta header, which would be the visual meta header start, our @visual meta object, and visual meta header end. Semi-structured, here's an example with the errata. Let's say you don't have missing errata. Errata can be missing, or it can be instantiated. If it's instantiated, it would take the form of visual meta errata start, followed by visual meta errata content. And we saw below that the visual meta errata content down here could be either structured or freeform. So we have that hook in there. Then eventually I have to add more rules. I've been basically working my way from the bottom up to the higher level, and that's as far as we've gotten so far. I'm testing the bits as I go. So far, everything seems to be working and relatively bulletproof. Now, our question is on something like @visual meta errata start or @author details, which fields in those records do we want to have as requirements? If so, I can construct a set of required keys, see if the returned object from the generic grammar rule contains all of our required keys and throw an error if not. The way that would be done would be adding, and let me just find our author example. Here's our author details. Let's say that we wanted to require that every author have a first name. The way that would be done would be to include a predicate, which would be some JavaScript in a set of braces after the object, which could look at the value of the previously matched author information and see whether all of the authors in that list had the field. And it would either return true or false. If this expression returned true, the rule would fire and successfully match. But if it found something missing in its analysis of the final structure, it could return false, in which case the rule wouldn't match and the generic parsing system would throw back an error message saying that it was expecting to find an author name or whatever, and it couldn't find it. So that's sort of the work to be added to the grammar next. Maybe I'll have something working by Monday. That's as far as I've had time. Fortunately, my dad's oral surgery recovery process is finally complete. They got stitches out of his gum, no more bleeding. He can eat again like a normal human being. And we don't have any doctor's appointments in the immediate future. Yippee!
Beautiful, Peter, beautiful. Really nice. I think, so you actually just got Nebulous straight in and it's doing its job. Beautiful, yes. You know, Peter, that this is what you're doing here is exactly MetaLisp in Java, because that's what it is. MetaLisp was a kind of language-oriented programming. It was all about you just define the language, the input data language of your thing, and do some semantic actions and all that. So what's that EC, by the way? What is that EC stands for?
That's just an abbreviation for escapable character because it's going to appear in a lot of places. So that was down in our run definition. And where are we? Yes, escapable character. It's either an escape at sign or escape right brace. And of course, we can extend that and add more escape symbols as we test.
Okay, now I get it. So that's really nice, and I think I got to upgrade my knowledge about IMBA and PEG. I certainly need to. This is really nice, really nice.
Yeah, because basically the idiom that you have is you look to see PEGs have unlimited forward looking.
No, I understand it. It's TDP because it is a parser. It doesn't have the cleverness of handling well the ambiguities, but most of the time you don't need to. So that's perfect. Right. That's perfect.
Yeah, it seemed like the right tool for the job.
Yeah. And you know that the Aho and Ullman just got the Turing Award after 40, 50 years. I mean, this top-down parsing language, which is really, this is it. This recursive descent parser was in the original book, 40 years ago. It goes back that, I mean, it's amazing, we won't get a Turing Award. If Aho and Ullman took 50 years to get a Turing Award for something so fundamental,
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now.
No, yeah.
That's fine. Now, Peter, I've got a question. It doesn't need the sharing. I just want to, I mean, this is a wonderful reminder to me that I only know enough about code to be dangerous. But I love the structure I'm seeing here. I just wondered, did any, to sort of look at this from a different angle, did anything coming out of doing that sort of, were there any bits where you felt that the structure that you needed to give it was sort of meshing uncomfortably against what we needed to use it with? I'm not presupposing an answer either way. I'm just asking because I don't know.
I think we're doing the right thing with the explicit start and end tags for the environments. I like that we're being consistent with having all of our record-like structures following the BibTeX conventions.
Yeah, I mean, BibTeX itself was designed to be kind to parsers, in the beginning. So.
And that's nice. I mean, one of the things I find quite elegant is one thing it did, although nobody really uses it properly, probably, is the fact that, somebody really had sat and thought about things like names and sorting.
Now,
Because it doesn't matter until it's your name that gets mangled, you know.
oh, one thing that I was thinking of was how we can indicate where in the main text we want to have the authors and the citations. I'm thinking it might be nice to extend the parser so that it can go through the text and turn it into a series of runs of text followed by author references and citation references, so that those spots we can dynamically add our meta content like Freud already has so beautifully done in author. I want to be able to have the parser result be a little bit more friendly so that it can hand off to IMBA a data structure that IMBA can automatically say, okay, first I'm displaying this run. Now I've hit a reference to some of our metadata. Now I can go off, grab that metadata, pop something up on the screen optionally. So basically, the citations in the text would wind up being replaced with objects in the rendered HTML tree with style sheet information on them that would cause them to display in full glory if they're moused over, or cause IMBA code to run when they're moused over. IMBA is really beautiful in terms of providing those interaction hooks in the language. So if the data structure was handed from the parser wasn't just, okay, here's our block of our paper content. Instead, it was a list that consisted of, here's a chunk of paper content, here's some metadata that you want to inject here and do whatever you want to do that's interesting with it. Here's our next run of ordinary text. Here's our next little reference. So it would know what spots in the document it wants to do. And then we could also hook into that the glossary tool. We could have the parser look at all the glossary entries, reparse the source text. So basically this would be a second pass. First pass brings in all of the visual meta. Then we write a secondary parser that would take the raw text of the document and annotate it based upon the visual meta we had at the back, then hand off to IMBA or whatever rendering system, Angular, Vue.js, whatever it is you're working with, a data structure that consisted of runs, metadata, insertion points, and more runs.
I love this. What that plays back to me from the sort of the human experiential side rather than the sort of the code view of it is that, as you explain that, I'm thinking, this is nice. What I see us is you know, we have the PDF as this imperfect vessel that's essentially forced upon us. You know, it's where we are. But what you're describing is the content, the sort of textual content, or in for something structured like academic writing, beginning to fly free of that. Because actually, once we have that structure, whether it fed in from a PDF or something else, becomes notional. And this may be our escape path from the shackles of you know, the review thinking of well, this is how we used to do it in print, which isn't to undermine the joy of what we get from the printed page, but it's more that literally the technology of, you know, cutting metal and stamping it onto a page and then making a facsimile of that digitally, which is what PDF in its time was doing, and it, you know, it was a good thing. But clearly for the long term, we don't need that. So having this with this richer structure, and that links very nicely to the ideas that Freud was talking about way back about having documents that were more self-descriptive.
Also, I was wondering whether maybe I could do a short piece describing this process and how I built this tool to contribute to the next volume of the book.
I think it'd be interesting, not least in the, at the level we sort of in the sense saying, you know, as well as the code, saying, and what it, for the many who'll read it, who won't understand that. So you can read it at two levels. One is those who have an understanding in the sense of the software, so, you know, the computer side of it. But I think as valuable would be to say to other readers, to be able to say that even if you don't understand these bits, the takeaway part is this is what it allows.
Here's the process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that should excite people.
So, Mark, first of all, Peter, absolutely fantastic. I'm overwhelmed both by the effort and the complexity. I cannot properly read code, so it's nice to see Mark and Jury get excited. I understand, of course, the ideas you're talking about, at least to a point of Dunning-Kruger. Do I understand the ideas? However, when you talk about the next book, so first of all,
The next volume.
Yeah, the next volume, yes. Mark, the visualization, each single item there is an article from a journal, right? So each
Yes.
year, roughly speaking, would be one journal, and every bit on the visualization is one article from that journal, because there's only one hypertext journal per year, right?
That is correct.
So maybe one of the first things we should do with the rigor that you're applying to this, Peter, is that every single article in the book should be treated like its own object in the same way.
Oh,
And
yes, good idea.
Right. So if we then find a way to share this within the community first, we could maybe even have a few citations between articles, just to begin to show how, when this is done with a bit of rigor, we get a bit of plug and play benefits.
Especially for volume 2, because one question I mean, it's stupid after the fact once I'd asked it, but I said to Fred, well, do you want people who were contributing originally to sort of do so again? And I don't mean just, basically warming the same homework up and handing it in, but either adding something new or perhaps responding to what other people have done. So that would be really interesting, because that really is an opportunity for us, for instance, to look at what's been written, a map between various areas, and start to create these trails between things. So that's rather exciting, actually.
Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, could we maybe include this source code as a literate program as an appendix? So I'd like to go through this and use a literate programming tool, NewWeb's what I'm currently using, although I'm thinking about trying to replicate NewWeb's functionality in the new version of Tinderbox. That's like my next project. Once I have this parser and the visualization demo out of the way, I'll be moving on to that. But basically, the way literate programming works is it would be an essay. It could talk about how this was put together in an expository order, injected with little fragments of the source code for someone to follow.
So I can't answer that directly because I just have no clue. It's really for all of us to look at. However, there is this one guy. Let me just see if I can find his name. I know him on Twitter. His name is Robert Hasefield.
I've
He
heard
is,
of it. Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes.
So he is all into, he wanted to produce it like an Obsidian graph, his article. And I said, well, at this point, it has to be flattened into PDF because I want to have a book. I think that that's important.
Yeah.
However, can we make it crazy with code? Of course, that would be fantastic. So Peter, maybe you and him, if we can call him into discussion, can have a discussion about this, because it seems to me that you're talking about kind of embedding live code in here. Is that right? Or logic, at least?
No, I'm talking more Newt's original position of turning the program into an essay with the fragments of code embedded in. I don't see anything actually running in this case, although you certainly could try to experiment with a live notebook. But that would be like a whole different project. This is more a matter of turn the code into a fully documented essay explaining the code that's organized in the order that someone who's reading it would be able to make the best sense of it. Introducing peg concepts, then showing the fragments that are building up. Just like basically, it would be an essay corresponding to the walkthrough that I just gave you, nicely formatted with the little typeset code blocks in it and the text walking you through.
I think that will be phenomenal.
I think I really love that idea, because even
Yeah.
if it makes many people, readers, scream and run for the hills, it matters not in the sense that this is again us bridging the sort of the technical side of our experience with all the other bits. And if we don't work on that, we'll still have this sort of gap down the middle. So I think it's a really interesting idea.
One thing that I would like is for you to do. I can't, Peter. I will buy you a very fancy dinner if we can do that. I would be very grateful. Hopefully, it will be in person, but that's another part of the story. What might be fun with the kind of understanding that this community has built of what this is now. Imagine if Robert Hasefield, for instance, were to say, I'm writing an hypertext thing, and the way I'm going to do it is I will say this object will be encapsulated with these characters, and I'll show a relationship using this way, and I want the initial layout to be such and such, and he will write that on the page. So it'll still have some meaning, and you, Peter, look at it and say, well, actually, it would be better if you change this and that, and you have a dialogue, and that means that we can embed amazing stuff in normal text documents that can be exploded. This is part of the original dream of visual meta, which has really been put on ice, of course. But the way that you want to write your article, there's no reason, Peter, why parts of your article shouldn't be select text and run. You know what I mean?
Yep.
As well.
And also there's a meme that I've been trying to get out there, and that's the notion of epimarkup, which would be stylized fragments of text that could trigger the generation of actual markup. So
Yeah, that's it.
When we say blah, we mean blah. That pattern could automatically generate a glossary entry, as opposed to having a formal glossary syntax. Just that pattern of ordinary text would then be expressed by the system as an embedded markup object, even though it could also be read if you just had a straight copy of the text without any automation for its literal meaning.
Peter, you just described trail marks, okay? You have just described its essence.
But hang on, this is really, really good, Jerry. Before you guys talk about how these things connect, one thing we need to do at some point is really talk about our own language. Because, for instance, for my users and author and reader, I don't talk about glossaries ever. I talk about concepts. And I talk about defining concepts, because Command D is a better keyboard shortcut than Command M for various reasons. However, when you export a document, it just magically happens to give you a glossary, because that's what people think about. So, Peter, I think what you're talking about, of course, is a different glossary than what somebody would make for themselves while learning. But I think it is really important to have automatically generated glossaries, personal glossaries, and subject glossaries, right?
Yeah.
So maybe if Peter and Jury address that now, it'd be really interesting to see what both of you think. Yeah, Jury?
Can I just quickly say, I put it into the chat because Peter was kind of to turn up to the personal knowledge graph builders call that I had. And apparently, Peter, you already showed me this. I just, I annotated it and put it in the back burner. I wanted to look at it back in May, okay? So I'm sure this we're talking about, I put it in the chat because that LaTeX knowledge thing, that's all it does. Again, Mark, it helps handling semantical notions in scientific document. It's basically, I've seen Peter showing it to us. It's basically, you do this kind of meta level thing inside the LaTeX, because LaTeX is gets interpreted. So it's got the ability to define semantically meaningful terms as long as you will define it somewhere else. Now, that really brings back to this is what trademarks is. It's basically that notation. Next week I should show you. Is basically give you a very easy, lightweight mark in. So you got any text, you can just have a new line and put in the bit of trademarks, which gives you the semantic injection point. I'll show you next week. But there's one thing, Frode, I wanted to show you long time. So can I just share it? It won't be long. Is that you've been talking to me glossary, hyperglossary, remember, back in 2018. Now, as it happens, I'm
with Sam Hahn and everybody.
Yes, as it happens, Frode, I've been following your work for, well, at least not the full 10 years, but at least 7 years. Okay, liquid and everything, and it's really easy in the genes. So, and of course, we both following the same masters. Okay, so it's not that surprising. But I just wanted to show you that one of the many notions, but the glossary is this fundamental now in trademarks, that basically anywhere in the text you are, you can just say, sorry, I should do it this way. So anywhere you are, this is what trademarks does. Anywhere where you are, you just say hyphen gloss, and there you got a semantically separate layer where you can give some glossary for the encoding context. Okay, so this is really a beautiful example of how critical that concept is, because basically in any context you can provide some definition of whatever you're talking about. And the beauty of it is that instead of you opening a glossary document and putting it in, Trailmarks has this brilliance, which is recent, is that you write where you are, and the system should be able to collate all these scattered glossaries and create your own. And so you can actually when you go into the meta level, you could actually harmonize them. So that I just wanted to show you that.
Hang on. So in the example, the yellow example, gloss : trail marks, the bullets below that are your definitions for trail mark.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And this is really actually, this itself is a clue. Gloss or hyphen anything colon target is called a clue mark, a clue, together with the implicit, with the next enclosed nested list structure, which itself can be just plain text or again another clue, like here. Okay, like here I'm showing. And the point is that at this point, I'm talking about some design problem. And at this point, on the fly, I just want to say what I mean by a persona is a profile created by an individual as a web native account. It's a very specific meaning. We're not interested in one definition. We're interested in the contextual meaning, and which you can then refine and all that. So all I want to tell you is that Trailmarks, one of the most important concepts in the which is the most used, is indeed, and you were right about it all along, and I told you all along, yes, it is a crucial thing. And instead of a glossary, you can just throw in glossary definition fragments, basically. Okay, and I'm really happy with this, because this is what this enables me to do. I mean, Trailmarks itself enables me to design concept complex things incrementally, and whenever I'm in a context, I can just say what's in my mind. That's the most important thing. That the problem with the existing idea of capturing knowledge is that you have to decide which document shall I write the right place where you're going to write, when in fact what you really need to do is right where you are, and leave the system to weave them together. And the other way around too, this is something I'm working on now. So whenever you are in any context, very simple, no AI, just simple algorithm could give you a hypermap of the enclosing neighborhood context. So you can immediately find what is relevant where you need to go. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to share at this point. Yeah. So I mean, and in fact, my vision is that this Trailmark in, and I'm doing experiments with Eduardo, Anagora, and Brian of Canopy. I want to really show that whether you're talking about personal knowledge graphs, whether you talk about truthful thought formats, Trailmarks is just that elation. And Peter, is exactly what you're doing at the point where what you showed, but you did it inside later. Okay, so it's really this kind of all you have to do is give it a name, and then later elaborate and figure out what you really need to add.
Peter,
I find it just so amazing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very similar to my thinking around concepts and definitions. Peter, does this kind of slot in somewhere, do you feel?
Yes, it does. Also, I should mention a pattern that I use in some of my other projects, and that's that when I'm building a parser, I won't just simply return one parse. Instead, I'll return a 3-part data structure that will consist of a text representation, a typesetting code representation, plus a structured data representation.
Yeah.
And giving those 3 views, and then the next code, when I go reusing those rules in another context, I can choose whether I'm going to be pulling the typeset version. I can grab the structured data version, use that to decide whether I want to show a typeset representation or not, and layer those together, because at the structured data representation, I could get, say, a list of things, and then I could walk through that list and either give
Yes,
the
and
raw
that-
text or pull in the LaTeX typesetting code related to them.
And the structured
that's a really good
representation, if it is together with a meta description of what that structure is, and
Exactly.
if that is also malleable, then really you got universality.
So, listening to this, it feels we're now in a nice bootstrapping phase, because one of the sort of the immediate challenges is to take the elegance of these ideas and to start to put them in front of a wider audience who will be, I think, almost predictably at outset either confused or annoyed by it. So one of the things is, well, okay, how do I begin to write, or how do I begin to structure my ideas or my narrative to enable me to use these
Well,
affordances?
I got good news for you. Christopher, my friend, philosopher, Polanyi scholar, whatever. I mean, he's got it down to a T. We work together on papers, because whatever I write is incomprehensible. By the time I explain to him what it is, then, oh, no, I know what you mean, and we end up with something actually usable. But he's working in a way, it must be in Google Docs. Google Docs is beautifully formatted, aligned, everything. And this is actually something I learned from him, and it's amazing. Once he wrote down a paragraph, or we wrote together, then he counts the lines. And if it is not 22, then he reconsidered everything and shapes it, adjusts it. And I realized that discipline of forcing you to reread 3 times what you wrote, whatever is the reason, whether it's the 22 line or is actually, but the crucial thing I wanted to say, I had written the 28 pages in listicles 2 years ago. And of course he couldn't work with it. So I had to translate it into blocks of text. And the other day he was giving a presentation and sent me a 2-page summary, and it's okay. And I turned it into my listicles, and he looked at it and said, wow, okay? Because then he realized that the rhyme and reason of your sentences, if it's reflected in that structure, is actually good. Instead of you scanning the line, you know exactly where to do. So I just want to as an experience from the field, that people, when they see, especially their own content laid out, then they say, oh, that's actually neat, because once you are in listicles, then you can actually, at sub-list item, and you can put in anything semantics that you have in mind.
Because I think that there is some sort of cultural bridging to be done here, and having spent a lot of my working career effectively crammed between the 2 tribes, I'm very pragmatic that it's all going to start with everyone standing on opposite sides of the room, sort of facing away from each other. And so I'm really interested in it's sort of basically getting people to, instead of sort of holding on to the handle at their side of the pool, to just swim out a little way, to see what might be the other side. Because I don't find any, I don't personally see any of these things as being particularly challenging. I think there are new things to be learned. And part of the thing coming the other way is to get people to engage with it enough without fully understanding it, to be able to say, well, where do I put this thing? To which someone said, well, okay, that's fine. That's sort of, that's something we hadn't necessarily encapsulated, which might, may need to go the other way. In other words, it's not all about, it's a 2-way process, that's the simplest way to put it. And I think the sooner we can get people actually engaged in that, who in a sense have no more skin in the game than interest in doing it, that'll be good. In other words, because they have nothing to lose. They're not doing it because they came from a particular standpoint. Just saying, okay, well, if this is going to fly, what do I have to do? Can I do what I have to do? And at this stage, I don't know, and I'm not. That presupposes neither a yes nor a no answer. But I find that quite exciting, and it is a veritable bit of bootstrapping, because we don't know yet, and I think it's a place we have to go to.
Well, I don't know how many users workflow he has, but I think millions of users actually. And it's been around for 10 years. And all they give is listicles. And I remember when Jack shared some of his work with me, and all he does is work in listicles in Google Docs. That's all there is. Yeah. So but I take your point. I mean, yeah.
No,
It's
I mean,
gonna be,
yeah,
it's gonna
exactly.
be whatever is a difficult transition from the plain text to the semantically enhanced text.
I'm always worried in sort of making these comments that I'm sort of
Sorry?
sounding negative. I'm actually positive about the whole thing, but it's sort of encouraging others, you know, who aren't yet in the room, to feel as positive, to at least be prepared, because part of it will be, I mean, at one extreme, it's probably not going to it's not going to change the way you write War and Peace, but in a lot of other things, it probably does mean a change, and a change for the better for the world that we live in. So it's getting people to be open-minded enough to say, okay, what will I end up wanting to choose about how I relate to the production of basically extracting my internal symbolism into text? How will I change that in a way that gives me a richer return? And I think there's a quite fruitful debate to be had there.
It's an interesting thing that there's a project called HyperTag, which basically does exactly what Treyarch does, except with Python syntax. And it's sort of on top of Python is already a sort of tab structure. Mm-hmm. So they have added to the Python this idea of, okay, you can have some way of introducing a semantic term and some way of elaborating what it means. So HyperTag is doing the same thing within Python. Yeah.
So, can you say what I'm doing?
Let me move the chat out of the way. It was covering up the window. Okay, shifting it second screen. Yes, now I can see. Oh, what I wanted to say was that I think I'm going to treat validation as a higher level against structural matching. So first we can have the well-formed tag, and then we can have the notion of a validated tag, and a tag can be either a validated tag or a well-formed tag. That way we could handle matching our generic @visual_meta rule, and then we could also observe that it wasn't a valid @visual_meta rule because it was missing its visual meta ID. So that would let the parser send back more useful semantic information to the user. And instead of just getting a parse failed, it would get a message that you need to add a visual meta ID or you left out the author's last name. So again, it'd be first try to match a validated version. And if you can't match the validated version, then you fall back to the structurally well-formed version.
I think that's an interesting part of the exploratory phase is being able to give enough for the mechanical part, if I can call it that, side of the process, to say to the human, the reason I don't understand you is because I was expecting this and you didn't tell me, which again should enrich the debate about, you know, where and what has to bend to find the happy medium in the middle. So I think that's really interesting.
So before we get to that, I just wanted to address your very first point today, Peter, which I think was the different, the minimum requirements of visual meta. So I thought we should agree on that. I think they're probably obvious, but I'm sure you guys might have comments nevertheless. I don't think we should go any more granular than this. What do you think?
Well,
I don't think we're shutting anything out. Sorry, Peter, you were about to speak.
Yeah, I think within the levels, we need to address what are the required fields for the field structured components in visual meta.
Could you write that as something I can put in here as an article or a paragraph?
Let me think about it.
Okay, it would be very useful to have someone who's written a parser for it say what should be there to parse, you know?
Because basically there are going to be some required fields that have to be there. Like an author, it wouldn't make any sense if it didn't have a first name and a last name, or at least first initial and a last name. And of course you have like the meta level notion of whether you're confident that the information is accurate. And you can almost get up to a meta level. I'm absolutely certain that I have no idea whether that's the right name, as opposed to it might be the right name, but I'm not confident in it.
Because here, regarding what you're saying there, so this is, I'm sure we all agree on this, the structure. So first is the intro block of text. Then we have visual meta, ending visual meta, and outside of that, we have the errata, because that's its own thing, which is amazing.
Okay, let's go into the visual meta header, start. Let's go into the introduction text with the visual meta. Okay, now for this, which of those fields are going to be required and which are going to be optional? That's what we need to hammer down. Like generator. Is generator required, or can generator be optional?
I think all of this is required. And I think an acceptable answer can be unknown. What do you think?
Okay, that's good.
So should I write on top all fields required, but the value can be unknown?
There might not be a generator though. What if someone did it by hand? Or would we say that hand generated is a value for generator?
No, that could be InDesign. I did it by hand in InDesign, which generated the visual meta document, not necessarily the visual meta. Good point.
Okay, that's better. Good. Because that would have confused someone otherwise. And then another broader question, do we want to become the purveyors of a certification mark on visual meta tools where we could have, VM working group approved that people would be allowed to use, so that someone would know that any VM meta working group approved tool was something we looked at and we assured ourselves that it was going to be producing visual meta that corresponded to that standard, so someone could just look for that service mark to indicate that it had been tested and works.
I think we're giving ourselves work / giving you work if we do that. I think at some point we can add that, but I don't think we should start with that now, because it may also seem like we're controlling too much to others.
Yeah, plus the fact that it may balloon into a standards committee where nothing ever comes out. So I think probably having it fast and light at this point may be helpful, and let such an approval sort of, I suspect there will be a tipping point where, in essence, people will start asking for it, and the rationale will be clearer to those and more easily made to those who might be against it. I suspect now. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Plus, I have so much on my plate right now, I could use a team of 3 graduate research assistants to help me get through my backlog.
By the way, this is the new layout of the site. Oh, Mr. Allen is here.
Hello, all. Thanks for holding out.
We're still here. We're going through Peter's amazing parsing system for visual meta, and we've just been talking briefly about what the minimum requirements are. So I was just highlighting here. I made the site quite a bit simpler, highlighting highlights, and then instead of menu or sections, we just call them FAQs now. So how do I implement? You go there, it says the most obvious things, and then we have the structure. You click on any of them to see what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just talking in the header what things need to be there, and so on. So, but I'm going to stop sharing because it's not really that relevant. But the really cool things, Peter wants to write a piece for volume 2 on his parsing system, including code in his article, which I think will be really, really nice. And we were also discussing the ideas of making some of the document itself parsable. Robert Haysfield, he wanted to write a more hypertextual piece for the book.
Great.
I said that's all very interesting, but it has to be flattened to a PDF at some point. But so now we've been having fun talking about the idea of you write in plain text, like let's call a hypertext markup, which is of course what Rome and Obsidian people really do. But you write it in a way that Visual Meta can see that that is there, and therefore allow these blocks of text to be special somehow if the reader can deal with it.
Interesting. Perhaps a middle ground of that would be, doesn't exactly translate, but something I've been thinking about along the lines is tags as macros, right? So to abstract that a little bit, if you were writing to PDF and the only thing that is differentiating a word as being a function, a special word, something that would act differently in online, is a hashtag or some other kind of, a caret. But then that leads to it's either its formula or in that context, what the result would be off to the side. As an aside, is that a thing?
When I talked right before you left about in a few years, I don't expect people to be able to read, us to be able to read what's on the screen. This is what I'm talking about. I mean, we have tapback in iOS and Mac now, which is so useful, just a little thumbs up on text and all of that. There's no reason why we shouldn't do what you're talking about and say this bit of text is special in this way and make that into what Vint calls computational text. I think that's very, very useful. And it also fulfills the requirement that it can be flattened.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what can be done in that format in PDF, understanding that it's not, final, but it's maybe the start of a kind of a branching conversation. How do you address this thumbs up, this computational? Do you show the formula itself or do you show the result in context?
That should really be down to the reader software. So the dream here is that, okay, I have actual reader. Great, I'm a pioneer, so much fun. But someone who understands a different market should make a much better product for that market. So, like chemists should be able to just extract molecules live right out of that in a way that's so intricate that a historian just wouldn't be able to even click on any buttons that would be lost. That's my dream.
Yeah. That sounds good.
Sorry, go ahead, Alan. Go ahead, Alan.
Oh, well, then mine was more of I can always watch the video, but I would love to, when I jumped off, you're talking about the personal glossary and Apple's affordances. If there's nothing else to go on, I'd love to return to that for a little bit, get a recap, but go ahead, Mark.
I would just suggest, Alan, if you do have time, watch the video and skip to where Peter goes through his parsing thing. I think that would be of interest to you to have a look around because it's really quite damn impressive, I think.
Great.
Quite happy to give you a demo any day of my glossary, please.
Yeah, we should also do that. Absolutely.
Next
and see how they
Monday.
can.
Yes.
Yeah. So my availability over the next few months will be 99%. I'll be present, but there will be times where I, at short notice, will just not be able to make it for reasons that I'll maybe be able to talk about later. Yeah, Mark.
Just very quick one. As I was listening to Untalk just there, something I think we need to sort of keep in the back of the mind is that, well, it may be that in writing in a more structured way that's then reassembled by a display device or a reading device, that it doesn't matter that we don't have an underlying plain text. But one of the other unpleasant lessons of the PDF age is that with the amount of effort we now have to put into extracting just the text out of the documents we create, primarily and ironically, because we want to give it to machine learning, which can't cope with all the other dreck that otherwise comes out, to the extent that there are now people writing papers about using AI to make text cleaner, to apply ML to it.
Well, Adobe has the Liquid View, which is ironic in so many ways, but I mean, a PDF generated by author and open and reader, isn't that bad?
No, and
The reason I'm saying it, Mark, is
Mhm.
it's because it's not attempting to do a lot. You know,
Yeah.
PDF is really richly extensible. So if you keep it quite simple, it's not awful. ACM documents are more awful because they try to do more things. That's at least my impression.
No, well, I understand that. And my point was not a sort of argumentative or pejorative one. I was just mindful of the fact that one of the things we may inadvertently do, whilst embracing some of the things we're already interested in, is to lose sight of this fact that, and unless our AI overlords get cleverer about reading text, the affordances we're ironically putting in to make our consumption richer may actually, if we don't still have as long as there's a method effectively, and that there probably is. I ask because I'm not a coder, so therefore I'm making assumptions as possible.
It is a big point, Mark, and at one point, considering I think PDF are not going to go anywhere soon because nobody has the power to change that. There's no reason we can't have the full text of the document in Visual Meta, where we have carriage returns really clearly marked and stuff like that. But that's kind of a future horribleness.
Sure.
But yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, I got a solution because Peter already integrated with Nebulous. That means you can just, as you process the thing, the PDF, you can dump the plain text, put it out on IPFS. I mean, not out. That's the point. Compute its hash and share, and anybody is free to say, okay, I give you the full text, plain text, or whatever text version if you pay me or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's really.
Let me see if I'm understanding you guys. First of all, are we talking about at the time of publishing a PDF, also publishing from the manuscript, the authoring software, to a plain text, maybe markup file?
Yes, or HTML.
IPFS, and have them know each other. And the reader software
and Visual Meta could actually solve this problem
of
giving a canonical, authorized plain text version. That's huge.
Yeah. And that's why this is why it's exciting to me, because I look the amount of effort that's going into solving a problem we shouldn't have in the first place.
Exactly, and this
I find ridiculous. So I understand why it's happening, and I don't blame the people. And it's good that people are attempting to solve it. But I just think that, in a sense, we'll end if we double down on that, we'll end up solving the wrong problem, which is really we need to understand that for some time having a plain text representation of
plain text or HTML. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it should be optional. You shouldn't exist on both, but one of them should be there.
Jerry, can you
really is crucial.
Jerry, in text chat in here, can you please give me what an address to a text document in IPFS would look like, and I will copy and paste it in here as a suggestion.
Well,
just make one up. Just give me one.
Okay.
All right, and let me see. Here we are. Hang on.
Let's see who wins.
Okay, going to paste it in now.
It's kind of interesting. A lot of what we're talking about is writing is hard. Because thank you. Plain text. So what do I write here? Do I write IPFS? So the system.
Actually, it is not a link to a plain text, but an image, but it doesn't matter because it's the same thing. It doesn't matter what's at the end. I mean, for the format. Sorry.
No, but what I mean is, in order for this, should this be called plain text? So we need three things. We need to say what this is, that this is a plain text reference. Also, we need to tell it what kind of thing that is, and then the location or addressing, right?
There you go.
Okay, so I'm going to use Jerry's then because that has that bit in it.
Actually, forget anything after the. It's not a good one. It shouldn't have the edit. Shouldn't have the edit on it.
Okay, but I need it to be a link.
No, I give you a better one. This is a wrong example. Sorry, I've just.
No, but also Peter's example in here. What do I call it, guys?
Yeah, but what's the actual address format? Is it HTTP like the your example HTTPS?
Well, the point is that the IPFS is really the only thing you need is that hash, because that's all you need is something like that. That the
No,
hash
but-
itself,
No, but that's not. Oh, this is weird. What's going on?
CID.
It went followed a link or something.
Forget that one. I'll give you another one. That one is confusing.
I think I see, and an interesting point, and going back to what Jerry was saying about
It doesn't even have to be real, guys.
you may, and it's something you may make available. It doesn't have to be done at the point. Is it might be that you're pointing to effectively an API that, if fed that ID, could give it there, and it might be in certain circumstances that might be a commercial transaction for sake of argument.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mark has it.
Yeah, because I mean, I can see as you get closer to things like the law and and intellectual property and things, that then these necessary constructs, or constraints need to come into place. But I don't. So that the joy is if we can get the technology to sort of be able to deal with that potential road barrier. Because if it only works if everything is always open all the time, that's always going to be problematic for the world we live in.
Okay, I give you a good one. This is just the so-called CID, content identifier, it's called, and it looks like this. And if you take that and go to any IPFS endpoint, it could be, there are zillions of them, but IPFS.io is a good one. And just turn it into a URL like this. I'll give you.
Sure. Is it a fixed length? So the point is,
It is
what
fixed length. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So it's an alphanumeric. Is it case sensitive?
No, it is case sensitive.
So,
but
and
it's
just
all
in terms
lowercase,
of-
actually.
So it's
all
a
lowercase.
however many characters. So it's an alphanumeric case sensitive string. That's
Yeah, but
either
it's the other way
basically-
around. It's what the whole point of Nebulous is that if Peter feeds the submitted text to Nebulous,
Yeah.
and then compute the
Yeah.
then that means that anybody can decide to make it available on the net or just.
So what I meant was, if I look at the last thing you posted, if I know that it's got n number of characters, and there are no, there isn't a hyphen or something in the middle, then I know I probably have a valid hash. That's what I'm getting at. So the syntax of the hash is it has. It's
defined in the IPFS standard.
Okay.
So I don't know offhand, but it is very specific. This is why it's a protocol.
Okay, that's fine. Well, we can look
System
that up and link to it. So the fact it's defined is sort of a good takeaway at this point.
And also, they intend it to be permanent forever. That's the whole point of it in the interplanetary file system. There could be several versions of it, several algorithms, whatever.
Sure.
But the whole point is that's the whole point. The whole protocol must permanently guarantee that it will map into the right way. Trying to find it on the net. On the net.
I was
Some
just
of the
thinking about,
irony.
for sort of Peter's sort of parsing, that just you can go through and say, aha, I have an incomplete IPFS hash here. It's that level of that's why I was asking the question.
Yeah, okay, it's like the little algorithm you can have. I'm sure there is actually a library out there which would like a credit card number, whether it's a valid credit card number. Yes.
Sorry, Alan. I think. Sorry, just as he takes a bite of his breakfast or lunch. I think I stepped on you just now.
No problem. No, it was more of a pedantic point of it's interesting that the goal would be to have something an address that could last forever, but of course if that forever location is ever lost, what you're left with is complete gibberish, right? It makes me wonder if at times maybe we've got this all wrong. Maybe a better approach would be for all of us to carry around kind of our local version of the world that doesn't have to have unique addresses all the time, and then at times sync those up. I don't know. I was mainly making a joke, not making an actual indictment.
No, but that is actually the point
Sorry,
of visual
Alan,
meta.
Alan.
embed as much as possible you can on the same level as the content. I mean, I'm a photographer and videographer. I deal with reams of data. It's really bizarre to me why we have to protect text documents. To be honest, if I was given a PDF that had 5 pages of readable stuff and then I had 50 pages of data behind it, I don't need to scroll through that stuff. So yeah, keep as much, not the entire world, obviously, but keep a huge amount of the world in there. Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
Okay, I still I think I had the wrong example in the buffer. So
No, but I'm doing gibberish anyway, Jury, because it doesn't render properly in this here in WordPress. So, and also with space. So don't worry about it. It's just indicating, because also just because I'm also dealing with this thing here.
It's like a coin op. Insert any acceptable token.
Yes.
and I think it's also a good one to give an HTML as well, because for many people that's the easiest thing to get.
Yeah, but that's fine. That's what we're doing now. So we have plain text. Can have many entries for plain text.
Yeah, okay.
So
HTML is plain text. Yeah, okay, fine.
So I just mean one is the name of a document.txt or .html. Really doesn't matter for this for this argument. I think it's just at the bottom of the header it says, by the way, you can get it. Sorry. Oh, that's duplicated now for some weird reason. Okay, let me edit that. I do not like weird stuff in WordPress. Bad choice. Boom. Right, okay, but kind of let's go back a little bit to, I think, what Alan was discussing at the beginning of this. See, here it is in twice again. How is that possible? And that is concepts, right?
Sure. Well, I don't remember what we were discussing, but I'm happy to hear more about.
I think we were talking about. I got an email from a user of my software this week, and she wants a way to have the map kind of automatically populated. And I just said, right. I said to her, no, that's not what we do. We want things to be in your head. However, of course, that's very, very useful. It's just not what we're doing now. But I think that is what Alan is talking about.
Yeah, I don't know if you shared the comments I sent you a few weeks ago that were just kind of, ramblings the last minute, but I do have a lot of, at least I can bring ideas to the table. I'm not going to say that they're necessarily, I don't have a strong opinion about them, but there is a way that, and it may go against your aesthetic or what you're going for specifically with the tool. But when I tinker with concepts, I was having a couple of, two classes of problems. One, just coming at it as a, putting on the veil of ignorance, if you will, and saying, I'm gonna poke around at things and see if I can figure out what happens. And I was actually to get, when I do that, it's really frustrating to kind of like give a report of, hey, here's all the ways I've misunderstood your application. So all told, Frode, the application's amazingly intuitive that I was able to get as far as I got using this kind of, I'm a dumb robot. But there were some elements that where I, confusion was the result and probably is the result for some other people. So that's one class of problem, which I just would qualify under bugs, right? Either with my system or just something that's an easy thing to fix or be aware of and put it in a backlog. And then the other class of problems are more along the lines of opportunities to where everything's working as planned, but are there other ways that this could work? And what would be what's the fruitful hypothesis, result of giving the person an ability to do X instead of Y, right? So I'm happy to go into all of those. And I only kind of gave you a small portion of that.
Yeah,
list.
I mean, just as being defensive for a second, the naming of things in the software is changing. Like the term glossary has completely disappeared. This is not in the new versions. It talks about maps and defining, because it's really important for me that the user gets the concept straight, which I think is exactly your point. And right now it is a mess because it has evolved. So for instance, Command M toggles map view, Command D toggles definition, and that Command D should be used everywhere. So if you select text and do Command D, you of course get the dialog to define the text. But if you do Command D with no text defined, it will do that bit you saw earlier today where it just highlights your defined text in the document. So it's about what these keyboard shortcuts can give you in different contexts, right?
Yeah, yeah, and those examples are great. I think that's like that's high art with both of those, because I think I was able to intuit map without knowing it was map. I just guessed, you know what I mean? And same with D and define. There is a part of that though that I think is for iOS or for Mac users, there are a couple of like global affordances that you experience. And so one of those would be double tap to get a context. And that's the kind of thing I think that you should consider adding in there, which could just be like, if I double tap on a word that is, and I don't know the rules here, I'm not suggesting a set of rules, but like perhaps if you have a mapped term Thursday and you double click on Thursday, you would not necessarily go to a new view, but you could, or command.
Are you talking about when reading or writing?
When reading.
Okay.
Yeah. Little things like that are just helpful. If you get someone who doesn't know where to go next, before they get frustrated, giving them a simple way to say, hey, all you have to do is hit this button, or here's another way to do navigation. That's all.
Yeah, I find that really interesting to hear your comments on that now, because we're working on the iOS version, which has been a much bigger pain than expected interface-wise.
I bet.
To the point where I'm embarrassed in front of my wife for having bought an iPad Pro. It's like the coding cost is obviously significantly higher, but I have this device. It's beautiful, but it's not actually useful. Has been, every once in a while in the morning, I'll take it out, try to read on it, and it's a bit shit. So this morning, this is what was worked on. When you tap or just open a document, you get these interactions. So
you get which actions?
You get these things. Can you see my screen?
Up at the top, names, grammar, defined concepts?
Yeah, so this is reading mode. You have a black border, except for when you zoom in, that space will be used. So addressing what you're saying and trying to really think of that, the document name goes at the bottom because you don't really need to see that. In terms of what is expensive and cheap, real estate is different on an iPad than on a keyboard environment. So commands are on top, and this is expected to use an Apple Pencil because selecting text without an Apple Pencil is really hard. So it is keep the space on top. So here we have top left, we have the left arrow that of course goes back to the documents, that's standard. And then
if you click on, if you click very quickly, if you click on grammar, are you going to a different view called grammar, or
hang on, Alan, I'll get there.
Sorry.
Right, you are diving at exactly the key point, right? So top left, click to go to the folder, click fold to fold the document if it has visual meta, as we all know how to do. On the very right, click cite, that copies the BibTeX for this document rather than for selected text. Now, the cool bits are in the middle. They are the different views, exactly. So the defined concepts would be, this. So it would fade back anything that isn't a defined concept. And it's tap it on, tap it off, tap it on, tap it off. Right, and if you're doing it on a computer, you have Command D. Without selecting text, do Command D for defined, and then it'll perform this action. And it means that we have the space for adding whatever machine learning stuff is useful and accessible to us. Show named objects, highlight color-coded by grammar. These are things that are literally for free from Apple. There are APIs for this. So the thinking is you're sitting there, you're reading, you're holding this thing in front of you. You have your pen or your finger. You tap, and then at the top, you have these global view changes that you can just toggle instantly in and out of.
I have to go in a few minutes, unfortunately. But can I give you just a milestone thing to think about for later on that view right there? My contention is that space, when I look at that from a veil of ignorance point of view, I think that is a directory structure that starts with names, goes to grammar, it goes to defined concepts. So that's because either file name or path is generally up top like breadcrumbs, which is what it looks like. So consider not to get defensive or anything, but I think still up top is a great way to go. But there's a lot of other affordances that are available on iOS, which would be like even the
even buttons is probably better. I agree. Something that looks
yeah,
like more like
or
a button.
or
Like
you
breadcrumbs now.
you either long press to bring it up, or you like the Instapaper model where it starts out at the very top as a floating nav, and then as you go down, it disappears. But if you scroll up just a little bit, it comes back down. So there are all sorts of other additional options to get the same idea.
Visually, I think we'll change them based on what you said, but it's not going to be by movement. First of all, this is page by page. It doesn't scroll.
Oh, right.
So that's one thing. And of course, on iOS 15, when you view a web page, it has here's Modesty Blaze. Do you all remember her? The location bar is now at the bottom. Apple has decided that's where they want it, just for the heck of it, right?
That's funny.
Yeah. I think okay. So the main point of this is that as you're going through it, if changing view isn't instant and utterly painless, you're not going to do it other than when you're doing a demo.
Yes,
So that's why tap on top, it changes.
that's great.
Right. So that has to be that. And then the next thing we have to decide, and when you've selected text, what are the options? Of course, you've got to have copy, which is copy a citation. Search and references are liquid ones, so they'll have a submenu. Translate, we have in Liquid, but here it's free in iOS. Brilliant. Find is our find, as we already have. Highlight, strike, and then finally we have define. So obviously you wouldn't necessarily define a whole paragraph, but are we going to have rules for when it would stop showing up? I don't know. But this is at least the style of interaction we're working on. You read like
Great.
this, come across, tap, and it's a pain, but
What happens when you hit fold over to the left? Because it looks like you're going back. Is that essentially seeing the table of contents?
You lose your stake.
Oh,
does-
boy.
it does this.
Okay.
So that is one of the key and one of the earliest visual meta things.
Yeah.
And to make it easy, instead of table of contents or outline, we just call it fold, which is more kind of a verb type of thing. You're performing that action. So, that's why it's important to get the vocabulary right. So accept the question of how do you introduce a newbie into it. And the hope is, that little space on top is a placeholder for a lot of the stuff Peter was talking about today, for a lot of jury things that can be plugged in. You're going through, you want to do something universal with this document, here's a little box for it.
If you had all the money in the world, I would love to see fold actually fold to the headers and then come to essentially be the table of contents. So it's no different, but it's a weird little mental friction to see the button fold, but it's taking you back to the table of contents, which is a previous page.
No, it's not. It is folding it. It's not a
It is
page.
Okay.
Yeah. In the just briefly. So in their book here, The Future of Text, just close this other thing. We have, if I scroll back to the beginning, we have, first there's a cover page, then there's kind of the.
I see.
This
Yeah,
page,
that's
and then
true.
there's
Oh, yeah,
this.
got to go. Sorry.
Okay, thanks for
Jerry,
coming by,
see you.
Jerry. We'll have your demo next week. I look forward to it.
Okay, hopefully,
Yep,
yes.
yep.
Bye-bye, guys. I've got a jet too.
Okay. See you later, guys. I have responsibility, unfortunately, too. But it was good to talk today.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, I've seen that. I've interacted with it myself, but it always just occurred to me as a page out there in the metaverse that was the table of contents. But no matter. This is awesome. Sorry. Thank you for staying on longer.
No, that's cool. We had things to go through, but just as a really quick thing, the way that I see textual interaction is very much sculptural, like it's a sculpture.
mhm.
I don't like having a table of contents on the side. I know that sometimes it's useful, but then it would have to be like it's literally torn off. It has to be theatrical because I really think you need to feel the space. You're making that visible now. You're compressing this. You're doing that. Little bit Minority Report, little bit Clay, a little bit Halston. Have you seen the Halston miniseries on Netflix?
No, I haven't.
Watch it. It's
Okay.
amazing. It's a fashion
Okay.
dude.
There's some interesting sort of testing in a light way to do with that, in the sense of
I gotta go.
so taking
Okay. See you later, Alan.
taking that idea to people who don't necessarily know, read, or may not be particularly doing digital things. So in the sense of, it's like really weird at the moment, there's a current trope in novels where I think to keep you reading, I suspect this is what it is, to keep you reading on an ebook, that the chapters actually just come in the middle of bits of text, in middle of runs of text.
Oh, okay. That's a bit.
So in other words, now that potentially you're freeing the fold from the shackles of being the output or the input to the table of contents.
Yeah.
Because table of contents tell us, where to flick to. So that's an interesting thing to say. Okay, well, so what else? What do we lose? What do we gain? And it
Yeah,
may
'cause-
be nothing in either
I
case.
think that's a great point, Mark, because also if you've highlighted any text, when you fold, it shows in C2.
Yeah.
Gotta go.
Yeah, me too.
Bit hour long, but I look forward to talking to you about other things when we have an opportunity.
Cool. Okay.
Okay. Thanks for today.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.